Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 4 of the OBRY Hours. I'm your host, John MacTemis. So for anybody who's, who doesn't pay any attention to anything, there's an interview that I posted on my Jonathan MacTemis YouTube channel. I went on the Restoration Hour with Eli James last Saturday. So today's the 13th of January in the supposed year 2021. So Saturday, I want to say it was the 9th. I'm going to be wrong though, aren't I? Was it the 8th? Anyways, it was last Saturday. And mostly, I bounced around a lot talking about OBRY, but the reason is when he had suggested I should come on and talk about it, I said sure. I said, do you want it to be topical? And he said, well, you could talk about a word study on Beme. Beme, B-E-M-E, is the word that's most typically translated as like cattle or beast. Which, see, I just assumed that he said that because not only is he doing a series, part of a show that's called Genesis to Revelation. They've been on the first few chapters of Genesis for weeks. I thought, oh, okay, maybe that, kind of coincides. But, the thing was, as I began preparing for it, and I was supposed to go on 2 weeks earlier, but there was just some things happened. I wasn't able to appear. And I realized that a couple of weeks earlier when I was putting some things together, I thought, this is going to be a couple of things. First off, I'm afraid that what's going to happen is I'm just going to come out there and I'm going to start talking way over people's heads. And that's not said in an arrogant way. I don't think of what I do or my capacity for doing it as so lofty. And in fact, that's why I encourage everybody to do this, to use these sorts of methods. Or not even methods, but just theoretical OBRY, okay? And basically that's just the idea that we're looking at a language that, in and of itself is intelligent. And because of that, it does have sort of built-in defense mechanisms that can help us to understand things like where the text might have been changed, because there's a lot of different so-called Hebrew transcripts out there just available to us, and there's a ton that aren't available to us. There's a lot that we know of that aren't available to us, and then there's got to be so many not available to us that we don't know about. But out of all of those, there's a lot of variations, and one of the reasons there's a lot of variations is because a lot of them were penned by Jews in Jewbrew, which means that a great deal of them actually are penned in the block script with the dots and dashes, the Masorah, the Nikudot. And they fluctuate. They don't all say the same thing. They don't all agree. And that should be troubling to anyone. It was to me at the first. And so there are some manuscripts that we have that actually are in they're in a character that's actually far more like OBRY, but unfortunately a lot of those characters still bear that look of the changed character, So instead of the K looking more like a K, it is the Kaf, as the Masoretes named these things. So if you hear them called by their names, it's Masoretes that named them. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Thet, it'd be, I'm sorry, Chet, Thet, Yad, Lamed, I'm sorry, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. I'm used to doing these in my head in the more English Germanic pronunciation of them. So, Samek, Ayin, Pe, Tsa, Tsadi, Quof, Resh, or Rosh. Then the Sin, Shin, depending on where they put their inorganic dot. And Tav, that's what the Masoretes call it. Those are their names. Funny, I don't disagree with all of the names. I think some of them I think they do allude to something that's very similar to how we should probably be perceiving the characters, but don't trust them. Okay? I think they're similar in a lot of respects. They are. But what you got to do is you really need to understand that they have more of a conceptual ideology, a conceptual meaning, as opposed to one that's concrete. And you'll see the big problems with looking at them like they're concrete. If you should look at something just say like the I think it's called the AHLB, Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. This was produced by Jeff Benner. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work looking at them as like a concrete concept over and over again. It doesn't work, and what the user has to do, like Benner does in that lexicon, is just basically just kind of start making things up. Because they don't work. They don't work right. So you got to, you'll get some combinations that'll seem to work. Like he can make a combination like gam work, because he's claiming that the G, Gimel, is a camel, and it represents a camel, and that's what we're supposed to think of when we see it, or it represents the foot of a camel, they would say, right? Not the toe. And then you would have to put that together with M, which he says represents water, and you would have Gam, which sometimes is used as like a pool or something. So he would say that would be what the camel would go to drink, the Gam. A little bit oversimplified. The problem is when you get to a word like Gamel, which they all say is a camel, and I'm not convinced that it is, but you get to a word like Gamel and you add that so-called lamed at the end, and then it becomes kind of convoluted, and it gets really difficult to justify these things in a concrete way. So, I just wanted to alert everybody to that. It was interesting in the sense that I decided really not to, I'll put together a per se presentation, but just to kind of talk about what OBRY is, how it's used. Now, I've gotten requests since then from people, looking at the kind of tools or to get the kind of tools I use. Now, most of them they're actually at the OBRY Project website on the resources page, and for the most part, if I'm doing word studies in Hebrew, I'm only using a few tools. I'm using LibreOffice with, and you don't really even need to use LibreOffice. You can just use You can use Adobe Acrobat because I put them all up there in PDF. And so they're searchable. The indexes, the bookmarks that I put in them, they all work in Acrobat or maybe another PDF reading software. I just don't use anything else. I use Acrobat DC. And you only need a couple of those documents. You can open one of the Old Testaments, either the WLC or the MC are both published there. And then the Strong's OBRY list. And then you just get yourself eSword and a couple of good Hebrew modules, and you're really off to the races. Now, I know the thing is, a lot of people don't understand, well, how does that apply? Like, how can I do what I'm after? And the problem is, we're all after different things. We all want to study the Bible in different ways. We all want to do word searches for different reasons. We all want to accomplish different things. So it's kind of hard to actually say, well, here's how you use them. Well, here they are. But since I don't know what you're using it to find out, what your goals are, it's hard for me to tell people that, you should do this with it. Blank, here, do this. I do also have an exhaustive roots list that I've been working on for a long time now. And I'm actually pretty close to a version of it that is by no means near done. But there's enough of it. It's got enough body and all of these roots listed for anyone to use that as that's a really good jumping off point when you're looking at getting or deriving the actual roots of a certain word. A word may have, it may be a triglyph word. And so there may be one or another root used. You want to try to determine what family it's in. That's really important to get the family it's in. And that table is really helpful. So I'm actually working at trying to get at least a temporary version of that up. I don't want it to be misleading, so I have to go through it. And I got to look at I make a lot of notes in it as I go in various cells of the table. And I've made notes at the beginning of, glyph sections. I just want to go through and determine, which one of those or what of all of those notes and about different things, various words, or the glyphs themselves that I still agree with, that I don't think would be necessarily misleading. They may not be 100% correct. I may not think they're 100% correct, but I just want to make sure that I don't, completely disagree with them. And just so everybody knows, I was actually going through my bills the other day. So for people that donate on Patreon or in various other ways, there are people who donate through Facebook Messenger. There are people who have just directly sent me money and other things. That really goes a long way, and it is so much appreciated. Because I use that money to, for instance, pay for the Adobe Acrobat DC, which I have to pay for on a monthly basis. I use it to pay for the website, to keep the website up. I use it to pay for anything I can possibly pay for that has to do with the research or the work that I'm doing. So it is all put to extremely good use. I've had some people that have sent me funds to put towards publishing the book when it's done, and I appreciate that. They are sitting in an envelope in a lockbox right now. Here's the thing, though. I don't know how soon the book's going to be done. I wish I could say. I wish I could tell you that it was easier. I wish I could tell you that it was more straightforward, let's say. It's not. And that's not to suggest that, well, it's really difficult, because, man, boy, it's really tough. You really have to reach to try to illustrate with the Bible, using the Bible, the great differences between the descriptions in the Bible and the Middle East. But you don't. It's not extraordinarily hard to do that. It is quite time-consuming and daunting to put together all of the very small, minute factors, maybe of a certain thing, like maybe one river, one of the rivers of Odin or Eden. It might take a really, really long time of looking at just little slivers of information you get spread all throughout the so-called Old Testament, the early scriptures, to determine exactly where that river ran and where that place should be, geographically in relation to other places. Yeah, that's time-consuming. That's daunting. That's challenging. It is. But on the other hand, the other thing that is also extraordinarily daunting, that I've found recently, more than I had even thought before this, because I had used outside sources, like mainstream history sources. When I say mainstream, I'm talking about Herodotus, Josephus, Pliny, Ptolemy, Strabo, Eusebius, Jerome, etc. Almost not at all. Very little. Very, 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 very little. Because I have thought, well, and also the purported archaeological discoveries all over there. The purported discoveries. And I don't know if those artifacts are real or not, but I have serious issues with the people who supposedly found them, where they found them, when, under what circumstances, who these people were involved with, and the outcome, ultimately. You have to weigh all of those things. And I'm kind of shocked at how few people seem to do that. I didn't necessarily want to include a lot of that too, because I didn't want to spend a lot of the time in that book, which, by the way, the book itself, as it's shaping up, has so many chapters that are fantastic in illustrating the great discrepancy between the Middle East and the actual Bible and what the Bible describes. It's just fantastic. There's such a huge amount of material. Okay? Even if you had a very limited understanding of the Middle East, the geography there, the hydrology, the topography, the peoples, the current peoples, the peoples purported to be there from 1,000 years ago, we'll say, if you want to believe that 1,000 years ago the Crusades happened, and 1,000 years before that, if you want to believe that it's been 2,000 years since Christ. So you could even have a rudimentary understanding of those things, which most of us do. It's rudimentary. And you could still take the material from the Bible and clearly show the problem with the Mideast, the features there, the rivers there, the seas, the oceans, as I said, the topography, where they say certain things are, and But the problem is, the most recent chapter I endeavored to start writing was a chapter dedicated to Jordan. I didn't want to do all the rivers in one chapter, including Jordan, and I still yet have to go through all of the notes that I have now, which includes all of the notes I've taken from the Bible on the river Yarden. It's called in the Bible. It's Yrdn, Yarden. All of the notes I've taken on that river from the Bible, and then all of the notes I've taken from as many geographical sources as I can find, both ancient and modern, I guess, if you want to classify them in that way. Because I needed to establish some things. I really wanted to see what kind of the broad cross-section of a lot of people, have had to say about that river, because I was finding that just in our modern day and age, it's really hard to get good, accurate descriptions of it. Now, for one thing, since the Jews took occupation there in the 1940s, and they've really, the head topper Jews, Rothschilds and the other big bankers, which I don't think he's at the top. I think he just represents a consortium of people. But, since the time they've been trying to jam a lot of Jews in there and thus create a nation that they could use really just to advance their hegemony worldwide is all that was meant to be. But because they needed this nation, and they needed something that people really believed was a nation and really believed was an Israelite nation, really believed that this place could in any way, shape, or form match up to the sorts of details that we're going to find in the Bible for those who really want to look and pay attention. They needed to do some massive reshaping and changing of infrastructure. They had to employ the most advanced, from the 1940s to today, advanced technology in hydrology, in farming and irrigation. You wouldn't even believe it. I mean, that's the kind of money that's been sunk into that rock, which is mostly what it is, a freaking rock, a gravel pit. And it will astound you. So the problem is that they've been at that for, good 80 years, and who knows what they've been up to for a century before that. They've had their fingers over there really wanting to make that happen for a heck of a long time before the 1940s, okay? This is why you had like the Palestinian Exploration Fund financing these guys to go and do this stuff, and why a lot of guys who supposedly they've claimed made these really important discoveries over in the Middle East, not just in Palestine, Transjordan, the upper Tigris Euphrates Valley below in the area that they claim is Babylon, so on and so forth. Egypt and Egyptology, they've been highly rewarded, highly regarded. Well, there's a reason for that. But then there are some things about all of this. There's some phenomenon about all of this that are currently, as far as I'm concerned, inexplicable. I don't know how to make heads or tails of them. I don't know how to add them up. Unfortunately, I don't get a lot of comments in a lot of my videos. I don't always want a lot of comments. I do appreciate the people who comment and thank me for my time. That's always appreciated. Nobody wants to think that they're spending their valuable time in vain. So I always do appreciate that. But a lot of times, when I put these questions out, I say, well, I don't understand such and such. That is a very real invitation for you out there to think this over and get back to me. Give me your best shot. Think it through. Sit in a quiet place for a while. And if I bring up something that I say, it's just inexplicable, I just don't understand based on all the factors that I have why this has happened or is happening, I'm inviting you. Sometimes nearly begging you, help me out. Throw me some ideas back. If you're a little shy about communicating on YouTube, like wide out in the open on social media, send me an email. My email address is at the website. I think I include at least one of my email addresses, usually in the description of just about every video. Send me something that way. For you guys who enjoy listening to me and you want to see just what kind of an unbearable smart aleck I am in sort of my personal life, you can send me a friend request on Facebook. I don't accept all of my friend requests because I get a lot of spurious ones and I don't know who this person is. So sometimes I may not accept it if I can't look at anything about you. I don't recognize your name. I haven't interacted with you. Like I don't know where I would know you. Then it might be good to communicate with you a little bit on some other platform before I say, oh yeah, I'll let them be friends with me on Facebook. That's a whole different, thing. But there's plenty of people that I've met through just this channel. And it would have to be through this channel because unfortunately I don't post these videos nearly enough on my other YouTube channel, which is OBRY Project, on my BitChute channel, which also goes as OBRY Project. I'm pretty sure I have an account both at Library and maybe one other social media. I just don't have the time to post those things. Like, I swear, I wish I had somebody who was just like, hey, look, I just want to do my part. I'm not good at this or that. I'm not good at language. I'm not good at geography. I'm really not good at Bible study. I try. I want to. I really have a desire, but I'm not very good at those things. Well, I understand. Not everybody is. Not everybody is when they start. I wasn't when I started. Guys, okay, when I started this, I was a recovering drug addict who had been in and out of jail for years. And diversionary programs for years. My background is extremely rough and sordid. But, the thing is, I knew that I couldn't keep up that kind of life. That life was pretty much precipitated and carried on because of not being able to cope with the world as I was presented it. I could not, and I refused to accept the world as it was presented to me. And that eventually just led to the drug use and a self-destructive lifestyle. But look, I'm just saying, I know when you start at something, you're not going to be good at it. You're just going to get better and better. But look, if you really want to do something and you believe in what I'm doing, just get a hold of me and say, oh, I'd like something to do. Now, if I tell you, where I could really use somebody, really just use the help, is somebody that I could have take the files, for instance, that I post, say they're audio or audio and video files, take them and post them on multiple platforms. I create the content. I edit it together. I create all of the text that has to go with it. Could you just take the time and make sure that these things go up on multiple platforms and this, that, and the other? Not huge. Don't have to be brilliant either. It's something. So back to the Jordan. So when I was working on this chapter for the River Jordan, and the River Jordan actually has a lot of occurrences in the early scriptures. I didn't write down the actual number, but I do have my document up. So every time I'm going to start on a chapter, I open a document. I start a document that is essentially notes and research. They all go into that document, and they're going to be everything I can kind of find out about it in the scripture. A lot of it might be notes or thoughts that I have. There'll be points that I'll bring up. And sometimes when I have to, as I said, I'm finding it more and more necessary for a really good reason. I need people to understand that there is serious problems with what we've come to accept as authorities on history, on geography, and on biblical matters. All of these authorities, like all of those ancient historians and geographers that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, yeah, they are all seriously questionable. And there is a trick to all of this. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about the trick to all of this today. Hopefully today, unless this is made in a few different shots, then maybe tomorrow or the next day. However, on this episode, I'm going to talk to you about it because I guess for one thing, I have to remark on how surprised I've been in going through a lot of these ancient sources, so-called ancient. I do actually, for all of the things I don't like about Anatoly Fomenko, I do like the fact that how almost every time the word ancient appears in his book, History, Fiction, or Science, it's in quotes. So just kind of think of it like that when I say it. Ancient sources. Wow. If we really have academics out there that are worth their salt, and don't let me forget about salt. I've got a lot to talk about that has to do with salt. They would never let us be believing the things that we do in the ways that we believe them. And maybe not you and I. Okay, you and I we're ahead of the curve. We've kind of figured out that we've been lied to about a lot of things. So, we're sort of way ahead of the curve when it comes to that. But just people in general, let's just say, if you want mainstream Christianity or all those masses of Israelites who have no clue that they are the Israel of the Bible. Those people are the ones being deceived by all of this. So, okay. I'm going through and I'm tracking all of the the occurrences of Yarden in the early scriptures, paying very close attention to things like its physical features, how the Israelites interact with it or need to interact with it. Anything I can find out topographically, geographically, where things are in relationship to it, where it's at in relationship to other things, and so on and so forth. I'm writing all of that stuff down. And then I go through and I decide what points are probably going to be best to bring up throughout the chapter, because the way I've been trying to design this is I have a chapter, it's based on a subject, and then as I go through, I'll have subpoints to it as I go. Not unlike the way that I've been modeling presentations. So I'm like, all right, I really have to know a lot about this Jordan River over in Palestine. Because here's the thing. If you were to study the Bible, or if you were to study everything you could find out about Yarden or Jordan in the Bible, in kind of a relaxed mindset, and at the same time, you were looking at a map of Palestine, which had the Jordan of Palestine mapped out. It showed you basically the route of its sources, where it rises, and the bodies of water that it passes through. And if you weren't paying good, close attention, you wouldn't even notice first off, how wrong the Jordan in Palestine is based on the Jordan in the Bible. You wouldn't even notice. You might not even catch on to certain bits. There's going to be some information I'm just going to have to talk about here, which it's going to be it's going to be spoilers, because these are going to be points that I'm going to be putting into the book, specifically in this chapter, and maybe points at other chapters. I mean, I even decided that I've got to do a chapter literally on how disagreeable ancient geographers are one with another. Not only on how many errors have been made in describing Palestine itself, but how much these people don't actually agree one with another. They don't. They oftentimes absolutely don't agree. In fact, in general, a great many of the so-called ancient geographers and historians are so unagreeable one with another that I actually stumbled across a book that is replete with all of these instances where there's no harmony between these so-called ancient historians and geographers. It's not a weird thing. It's not like, that's strange that he should say that this was this many miles from that. That's interesting. I wonder why I said that. He just must have made a mistake there. It's not like that. I wish it was. I'll be honest with you. I wish it was, because I'm very reluctant here as somebody who is taking on the task of iconoclasticism, as an iconoclast. So, challenging these ideas that seem to be, unquestionable, just absolutely fundamental and unquestionable. I am actually kind of a reluctant iconoclast. The problem is if I don't do it and I don't pursue the answers to it, I'm likely just going to find myself back in that same mindset that I had so many years ago, when I just became less and less and less hopeful that this world was anything like what I had been taught through parents, through religious leaders, through the school system, through television, movies, through everything except my own senses, in fact. And that's what the great problem was, is that my own senses and experiences were telling me something so vastly different than what all of the sources of information were telling me. And that's enough to make anybody, at best, confused, and at worst, downright self-destructive. Which I'm not anymore. I'm not even remotely even of that mind. Not even remotely. In fact, I can't even tell you how awesome it is these days to look forward to the next day the way that I do, It's like for all of you who remember Christmas when you were children, like how much you looked forward to Christmas morning, right? It was like nothing but adrenaline for 24 hours straight, man. You wanted to get to that Christmas morning so you could unwrap those presents and see all that stuff you got, right? I remember being like that. I was terrible. I was horrible. I would get up, I think I would start getting up around 2 or 3. And just like sitting there or laying there, or I'd go downstairs and I'd just sit and I'd just look at the lit up Christmas tree because my adrenaline was just going so bad I couldn't sleep. That's nearly what it's like these days. To be able to every day get up at a ridiculous hour and go through the Bible, do word studies, go through old manuscripts and sort things out and try to figure, okay, how was this done? Why was this done? When was this done? What does the Bible have to say about it? What does it mean? It's the best thing I can even think of. Gotta be. Best thing. Because it's the truth. What do you have if you don't have the truth? What do you have? Pleasure? Pleasure's all right. I like pleasure. I like a lot of different pleasurable things, but all of that stuff has got its limit. You're going to bottom out. And you're going to peak, and you're going to bottom out. It just doesn't last. This lasts. This lasts and lasts and lasts and lasts. You're never going to get enough of it. You're never going to say, oh, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've gotten what I came here to get. I'm satisfied. Time to move on to something else. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That would only happen with somebody who really didn't have much of a regard for what they were doing, the implications, or the material in the first place. Even if they didn't believe that the Bible was true at all. You still have to try and appreciate the implications. The implications that the Bible has on the world. And do your best to try not to be so imperceptive and small-minded as to sort of brush it off like it's not a thing. It is a thing. It's a massive thing. The Bible has massive, massive effects on enough people that it influences the whole world. It's an enormously important facet of our world. Whether you want to believe it or not, you should still respect that factor. And you could put serious time just into that factor and trying to get to know, okay, well, it has such a massive effect, a massive direct effect on certain people. Who are those people? Why does it have such a massive direct effect on these people? Who are the people that it has a massive indirect effect upon? And why? Well, if it has such a massively direct effect, I have to understand what is it about it that has such a massively direct effect. I need to get in here and find out some things about it rather than just regurgitating the BS that these communists, these atheists that want to see the destruction of you and your kind have told you. Stop repeating that garbage. and think and go and do some work for yourself. Don't pull passages out of context like these little weasels that claim to be truthers. And they do that simply just to turn the ignorant people off to the great value, the great power, the great truth, the absolute treasury that there is in the Bible. Don't do that. Don't be that guy or girl. Don't do it. Because besides for hurting others with your ignorance or your laziness or your obstinacy or stupidity, you're hurting you too. So I see no reason to do that. Give it a good hard study. Give it a good go. So look, man, the Jordan. So there's the Yarden in the Bible, and there's the Jordan in Palestine. There's a lot of Jordans, man. The Mormons named one of the rivers that flowed into the Great Salt Lake, Jordan. It flowed northward into the Great Salt Lake, which is not quite like what we see described in the Bible, but there it is. And there's ample reason that I can argue, and I have actually, because I have wrote already the whole body of the chapter on the seas. And I'm really just going to be going back to that and doing some editing and adding in some of the ridiculous accounts I've read from others. They really get ridiculous when you start talking about the Dead Sea. Some of these people. But there's ample reason to believe that it might not have been actually salt. That mela. That word mela might actually not be salt. So what I had to find out is, I said, I want to know everything about the Jordan in Palestine. And the thing is, I've got to find out everything about it from before the Jews moved in and started taking over in the 1940s, because there's been so many things that have been done, that have changed its output, its flow. Not so much changed its course per se. But how much has it? If so, has it? How much? There was one paper that was written by these Jews in some society thing. They claim that the Jordan today has 2% of its historical output, which I honestly think is complete garbage. To make that kind of claim is absolute crap. And I give you really good reasons why. But it certainly does seem to have a lessened output. However, based on where most of the things are, like the water purification centers and the dams and everything, I don't think the Jordan has anywhere near as little what its output once was. But it's not just because I know where a lot of these stations are and what they do and so on. It's also because I decided to go back and start reading the accounts of all of these people who either claimed to have firsthand experience of this place, Palestine, and this little river, the Jordan, before any of this happened. So as long as it was like the early 1900s and before, I'm like, okay, so these people should be providing me with, I don't want to call it accurate descriptions, though. They might be providing me with certain portions of the descriptions that are accurate. However, most of the people that were over there exploring weren't doing so out of just their own desire. Most of the people that went over there and explored that region, whether it was east of the Jordan, west of the Jordan itself, the Dead Sea, from the Dead Sea to Aqaba, Sinai, Egypt, whatever. Most, I keep saying most, but I mean, it's like all of them. They were doing this because they were being financed to do so. Now, did some people do it just because they loved exploring? Sure. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, if somebody doesn't want to go and do that, it probably doesn't matter what you'll finance them for. And the thing is, most of the people that were going over and doing that, especially in like the 1800s, in the early 1900s, they knew that there was a lot of risks because, you know, the whole place traditionally, and for really as long as anybody can show, the whole Jordan Valley region, for instance, from a little bit at its where it rises, its source, down to the Dead Sea. Now, the whole thing is entirely littered with Bedouins who are freaking savages, murderer, thief, savages, brutal. Don't think right, don't act right, can't get right, savages. They are the equivalent over there of, you know, the American Indian, the South American so-called Aborigine, which they probably are. I've said this before. I don't know that I have a problem with the term Aborigine. Just because you could say someone was Aborigine, and maybe this is the problem. This is the propaganda. Just because you can say one group is an Aborigine doesn't mean that another group isn't as well. I guess that's been one of the biggest problems, that we've been sort of convinced, you know, something that maybe isn't so accurate. Yeah, I guess you could say this group was Aboriginal, but this group, which is very distinct from this other group, could very well be Aboriginal to this geographical area, while at the same time, this other group, which is very distinct from the first group, very distinct racially and culturally and so on and so forth, could also very well be Aboriginal. So I don't think there's really so much wrong with me saying Aboriginal. The people that were going over there to explore, they knew that there were these issues. And the only way that anybody would really feel comfortable with going and doing this is with a pretty large military, you know, presence in some way or another. And you got to figure, up until World War I, nobody could just come in there with some kind of a, you know, military force. They had to get permission from the Ottoman government to do this, that, and the other. And the Ottoman government was not going to be like, yeah, you know, you can go and do this and that, and we're going to guarantee you safe passage. Because here's the thing, you know, got to understand, the Ottoman government, they had very little control over what these Bedouins were doing. It's not like today. It's not like in territories that the U.S. or other Western European countries have sway over. You know, when they go in, they make everything orderly and safe for everybody. It wasn't like that in territories that the Ottomans had. And they were just holding sway in these places. They were, and you know, and they were, because they're all corrupt. All their officials are corrupt. Just like, unfortunately, today, most of ours are. It wasn't always that way with ours, and not at all times, but it's just so bad today with ours. But that's how it was then. They were corrupt. They would be getting paid off. It wasn't in their interests to somehow restrict the activity of these Bedouins. So it was difficult for people to travel. It was slower for people to travel. It doesn't take that long. If you can freely travel from one place to another around Palestine, you can get there pretty fast. But a lot of these journeys, they took a long time because these people would have to take all kinds of crazy routes all around this, that, and the other because they're trying to avoid this Bedouin and that Bedouin. It was ridiculous. They really had to be very careful and go all of these certain crazy ways to avoid being killed. You know, one of the guys that I just read this morning, a lot of his account of what he did, his name was Seetzen, and a lot of guys after him used his notes and letters he would write back. Now, I don't know if he was going there, if he was directly commissioned by Saxe Gotha, which is the house that has come to be known as Windsor, or not. But he had written back these correspondences about his travels. Well, the one I was able to get a hold of, it's all chopped up. So I got to try to find one that's complete. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. When I search for these documents, I search very, very, very thoroughly. And I don't always want to buy these things outright. First off, I don't have the budget for it. I do buy books whenever I can, when I build up the money, usually from donations or my own money that I'm able to accumulate. Then I buy these physical books. But a lot of times you got to think, well, you know, if I wanted all of the works of Strabo, I'm going to have to buy this whole full complete set. And not that many people produce the complete works of Strabo. It's going to be expensive. I'm really going to have to invest. And one thing is, I don't know how much information on what I'm working on Strabo is going to have in there, how much I'm going to get back out of an investment of hundreds of dollars, maybe even more in some cases. And secondly, digital copies of these things, like a PDF that you can edit and make searchable, is invaluable. You know, you can just search for the word Jordan. You can just search for the word Palestine. You can just search for the word Jericho. You can just search for the word asphaltitis or Dead Sea or whatever a lot of these places are variously known as. And even Jordan has another name. Jordan's original name is not Jordan. It's certainly not its Arab name. Actually, Jordan, just like Jerusalem has always been known as Aliyah or Al-Quds by the Arabs. Now that's a really interesting thing too. You got to think about that. They would know that when they came in. They've always known it as such. Boy, you would think after a couple thousand years of these various peoples dominating this place, calling it Jerusalem, they'd get it through their thick skulls, right? Well, it just makes you wonder if that's even the case. That it has been known as Jerusalem for all that time. And same thing with Jordan. Okay, it's to them it's Shariat el-Kabir. That's what they call it, which is supposed to be the Great Shariat, because out of all of the wadis, and most of these rivers over there are wadis. They're not full-time rivers. And the funny thing about Jordan is, because it has these fountains that actually feed it, it is a full-time year-round stream. These other ones, these wadis and so on and so forth, they're mostly perennial. Even the ones that are fed by underground fountains are often perennial. They don't really have much flow whatsoever. And especially the ones that are up north, what flow they do have oftentimes is brackish, because most of the water over there is, in fact, brackish. Most of it. So now this guy Seetzen, from what I know and what I have, his correspondences were published in 1810. And like I said, he's used as, and a lot of people reference him because, now get this, and this is what really freaks me out. He is considered one of the premier, because he was the earliest, exploratory sources of that area. Now, my first question is, how the hell can that be? And I want to use stronger language because it just perplexes me so much and it angers me so much. How could that possibly be? In his correspondences, and there's a map that occurs with it. I don't know how much he had to do with this map, which is just kind of wild. It really makes this place look a lot different. Really does. But in one of the areas that they cut out, it's the preface. And they start with, it's like page 1 of the preface, and I'm pretty sure the preface is supposed to go on for a number of pages because it goes from page 1, Roman numeral, to 6. And it like cuts off all of this stuff. Again, I'm going to have to try to do some searching and see if I can find a more full account. I'm not saying this is like a conspiracy that this was all cut out, okay? I'm just saying the copy that I found, it's got this cut out, and it's really, really weird because it says in this preface, I don't know that this is him writing this because it's not signed by him at the end of it. But I'll read you what little bit exists, okay? It has been much the custom of late. This is the early 1800s. Of late, to publish travels through remote parts of the world, and the more unknown and unfrequented the country described, the more eagerness has been manifested by the public to read and be informed. It is not therefore deemed necessary to apologize for offering the following pages to the English public, since, strange though it be, few countries are so completely unknown to all Europeans as those parts of the land of Judea which have been visited by Mr. Seetzen. So I guess it wasn't Seetzen who wrote that. Whilst the New World beyond the Atlantic has been frequently described and delineated in authentic maps, whilst the unproductive regions of Siberia and the deserts of Africa have been penetrated by modern hardihood and curiosity, the land which might be called the oldest portion of the globe, or concerning, and that's where it cuts off. And then it picks up 5-6 pages later with one paragraph. That's it. This journal of M. Seetzen, too brief to extinguish our curiosity, comprehends some of the most interesting objects within the plan of the association. That gentleman has judiciously directed his principal efforts to the illustration of the remote regions beyond the Jordan, and his success has been on the whole greater than might have been expected. The general tenor, moreover, of the narrative and the disinterested manner in which it has been given to the world have certainly no tendency to impeach the credibility of the writer. Now, I'm going to tell you about some weird stuff, okay, about this guy. Okay, one thing is, he was German. That's not weird. But Ulrich Jasper Seetzen was the guy's name. Now, I am doing a little bit on the computer while I'm telling you about this, but I tried doing a search on what they call him in this brief account, to see if I could actually find something a little better. Now, I'm coming up with pretty much the document that I already had. And I'm finding a copy that I didn't have. So I might read from that actually has those pages. Like I said, I didn't say it was a conspiracy or anything. But unfortunately, the copy I had, it's better to read. The other copies are kind of muddly. Anyways, they've got these pages, which I might read from. But Seetzen, kind of a interesting guy. So he was German, but he was exploring for interests that were English. Now, there's something interesting about the Germans and what they have to do with exploration and geography and so on and so forth. One thing I'm going to tell you about that was so interesting before I tell you a little bit more that I know about Seetzen. I did read a good deal of this what they call a brief account of the countries adjoining the Lake of Tiberias, Jordan and Dead Sea is basically what it's called. Something strange. I came across this book that I mentioned earlier, which it's a book that was compiled by this Frenchman in the mid-1800s. It was published in like 1857. And it was directed at one book. There was a book that was produced, edited by a guy named Smith. His last name's Smith. And it was a dictionary of geography, of Roman and Greek geography. So basically, pulling from all Roman and Greek so-called figures. So these are all the big ones. These are all of the key figures that we would come to recognize as being foundational in our understanding, even to this day, of geography and history and sciences. You know, a lot of these guys were also mathematicians or philosophers, all right? They kind of covered the whole gambit. If these guys were real and really existed, that is to say. How conspiratorial is that? But it mainly just covers the so-called Greek and Roman ones. Now, this Frenchman who's writing this criticism of this book, the Greek and Roman, the Dictionary of Greek and Roman Geography, he's mostly criticizing what's in there. And he's not necessarily criticizing the editor or the authors of the various excerpts and all that, as much as the material. Like this, there's something wrong with that. And in a sense, he's also criticizing the editor and who published it, because he's trying to say, this is clearly wrong, and you're passing it off as something that's factual, and it just couldn't be. It was really interesting because the first thing he covers is Strabo's assertion of this circumnavigation of the continent of Africa by the Phoenicians and how impossible that account was. And it's very entertaining what he chalks it up to as to why Strabo would make such a great mistake. And Strabo is a huge name in ancient geography and history, and he has been recorded as making so many mistakes or claims that are just ridiculous. It's just freaking ridiculous. Nobody would take anybody else seriously these days that were making mistakes like that. But, all right, so he's talking about another location. And before he does his spiel on that location, is very interesting because he quotes a Prussian who, this Prussian who I don't know, maybe they were somebody who was at the time a respected geographer or historian or something. He quotes this guy as saying, and this is going to be a paraphrase, all right, that besides for the educated, okay, we got to keep this in mind, the educated and lettered geographers and historians of Germany. And remember, at this time, Germany was still a number of, or a large collection of kind of independent governance still. But they were united by similarity of race and culture and language. He remarked that besides all of these educated and lettered geographers and historians of Germany, that there was this huge amount of young men, in his opinion and estimation, uneducated young men, who, as he puts it, were trying to make a name for themselves. This is what he says their motivation was. They're trying to make a name for themselves. And how are they going about that? Well, they're going about that simply by just questioning everything that was said before them. In other words, at this point in time, in the mid-1800s, there existed a very large number of young Germans, and maybe not so young, maybe even older Germans too, who were very voraciously, and he used very strong words in this quote too. It wasn't just a small thing. This had actually, you could tell just by the language that this had become was becoming a very big deal, that all of these Germans were questioning establishment, history, and geography, and maybe science. A lot of them were questioning this. Now, none of us are told about this today. That in the early 1800s and mid-1800s, there was a large amount of Germans. Kind of like today, there's a large amount of Germans out there that are questioning everything that's been told to them as establishment, so-called fact. All right, so here, I'll read you a little bit of this. Don't be a smart aleck and say, why did you read the other one and not bring this to our attention? Well, it's because when I was searching under the name that he's known as, and that this was actually published under, it wasn't coming up. And then when I searched by his full German name, it did come up. So I'll go to that, and then I guess I'll unless the intro actually takes care of it and covers it, I'll tell you just a couple of things about him. It's interesting. So you'll remember when I started, I left off on that first page. Whoever wrote this intro had said this. He said, while the unproductive regions of Siberia, the deserts of Africa, have been penetrated by modern hardihood and curiosity, the land which might be called the oldest portion of the globe, or concerning which at least the oldest authentic history exists, where the seeds of Christianity were first sown, and where the author of our religion lived and taught, is comparatively neglected and unknown. Wow. He goes on to write, a small part of Palestine has indeed been frequently visited by Europeans who have been led thither by motives of curiosity and devotion, but their view has been confined to the beaten track from Jaffa or Akka to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Even this part has not been described with the minuteness and precision that might be desired, and all the rest of the country has been left in, check this out, complete obscurity. To remove as much as possible this obscurity is the principal object of the Society of London called the Palestine Association. It is their intention to publish from time to time such information as they can procure respecting the present state of the Holy Land. They have sent a respectable and confidential foreigner to Jerusalem, with whom they are in correspondence, and they take this opportunity of requesting the cooperation of all those who may feel an interest in removing the present ignorance respecting Palestine, an ignorance which, independent of all religious consideration, is discreditable to an age of learning and inquiry. Yes, so we don't want you to be ignorant. We want it. We want to enlighten you in this age of learning and inquiry. This age, which is what? 1,800 years after Christ. Really, I'll continue, so I want to get all this in. They request that all persons, whether members of the society or not, will communicate to them through their secretary whatever information they may possess concerning the present state of these regions. Yes, we want to gather up all the information anybody might have out there. So we know. And because we have, why? Well, we'll see. We're going to see as time goes on. It's because of how absolutely conflicting what are probably either more sincere reports or just slips where these people didn't get their freaking story straight before they were published. So they want to get all this together so they can get their story straight. Now, and here's where the problem is, those loose ends, they go on. If any mariner or merchant has had opportunities of ascertaining correctly the latitude and longitude of towns or villages within that district, either on the coast or in the interior, their communications will be thankfully received. Since the maps which we possess are known to be extremely defective, but our acknowledged ignorance prevents at present all attempts at correction. This is in the early 1800s. We're told that we had just civilization, man. Some frickin' semblance of civilization for centuries. We were told that Europe had a renaissance. Like 500 frickin' years before this. And we were told a few centuries before that we were embroiled in the Crusades and that Europe, like the best and brightest of Europe, were over in Palestine for a long time. But hell, we don't really got anything too conclusive. We're putting the word out. Any sailors or mariners that might have come by information that we haven't strictly controlled, we would be ever so grateful if you would come and give it to us. We might even pay for it. You may never be seen of or heard of again. They go on. The following journal, which is now presented to the reader in an English dress, was written by M. Seetzen. See, that's what I was looking for him under, was M. Seetzen. Conseiller d'ambassade de S.M. Empereur de Russie. Okay. His letters were addressed to M. de Zach, Z-A-C-H, Grand Maréchal de la Cour de Saxe-Gotha, and Co., and parts of them appeared at different times in the Moniteur. Some members of the National Institute at Paris sent over these papers to Sir Joseph Banks, by whom they were obligingly forwarded to the Palestine Association. And then this last page was the page that I had read there before. So, not long after this, Seetzen dies. We're told he was poisoned in Yemen. Why? By whom? For what reason? Oh, nobody seems to know exactly. Boy, but I'll tell you what, the Jews think he's just great. Now, you can see in the Jewish Virtual Library online, they have an entry for him, Seetzen Ulrich Jasper, 1767 to 1811, German explorer. He studied medicine in Göttingen. During his extensive travels in the Near East, he visited Palestine, 1802, Mecca and Medina, 1810, and Yemen, 1811, where he was poisoned. His diaries were edited posthumously by Kruse and Fleischer. Kruse and Fleischer, two names I would never trust being a German. Seetzen was the first of the scientific explorers of the 19th century. Now listen, if exploration was sort of commonplace, which, damn it, you would expect it to be, why would it matter if he was like the first? They were the first scientific explorers of the 19th century. Why would that matter? Why? Shouldn't there have been plenty of explorers in the 18th century, in the 17th century, damn it, wasn't it like 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue? If he had just turned his butt back around, he would have went right to Palestine. What's the problem, people? With all of the religious fervor, right? In Christendom, how, and I want to say it, but I'm not gonna. I want to, but I'm not gonna. How the F do we not have accurate freaking maps by this point in time? He was the first European to note the ruins of Masada. Are you kidding? Yeah. Although he did not identify the site. Jeez. This is the beginning of the 1800s, man. Whoa. Now here's why this should really blow your socks off, man. And it did mine. Because I've basically read this information before, this intro, in various sources and in various ways, and it's been blowing my socks off. I am in disbelief. I don't know what I'm in belief of, but I am. In a lot of things, I guess. Like, look, man. What? So what do we got? We've got, what do we got? We've got this guy Herodotus, right? He's said to have visited the area 500 years before Christ. And he's calling all of the inhabitants there Syrian Palestinians. He's not calling anyone Judeans, Israelites. That's weird, right? That's weird. That kind of weird. I think it's weird, right? That's weird. So then here's where things get way weirder. This is the sleight of hand of it all. This is the sleight of hand, and this is where the River Jordan, it factors into this sleight of hand and this weirdness. If this truly were the Holy Land, we wouldn't have maps, geographies, and histories of anywhere in the world that were more accurate than these or abundant by this point in time, the early 1800s. So where things are kind of weird, so you can get a book on geography. I don't care when you get it from. You can get books that were made on geography from, the 1400s, the 1700s, lots of them in the 1800s and forward. And they will list all of those sites, all of those cities, lots of them. They won't list them all. They won't go that far. They'll make you find out that they're actually the cities. The sheer number of cities in just the territory of Judah alone was far greater than the amount of cities that are even in Palestine to this day, with every possible modern technology employed to just try to keep water, and not water to everybody, water to Jews. Okay, the Arabs get it 3 days a week. But they don't want you to know that, so they're not going to broadcast that. But they'll give you the big ones. They'll give you the big ones that you can remember. And they'll tell you, oh, it was here, and it was this, and it was north of this, and west of that, and so on and so forth. But they're not going to tell you that they can't place most of these places. You really dig through the people that are, as again, either they're a bit more honest or they were just uncautious. And since this is fallible people that are trying to control all of this information, they're not catching everything. They're not realizing every small bit of information that's going to be able to be put together at some point in time far in the future by people who have computers, who have Adobe Acrobat DC that can actually run word searches and start putting these things together. They're not thinking that that's going to happen. But that's what we have the ability to do. And we can start seeing all of the weaknesses in their narrative. We can see how as early as this Flavius Josephus, if you want to believe it was an actual man, that's fine. Okay? But, did he live in the actual land of Canaan? I highly doubt that. Maybe. Had they decided that Palestine was going to be the place where they were now going to be deeming as the Holy Land by that point in time? I don't know. I don't know. Because, see, I haven't been able to track all of this well enough to see when Josephus starts turning up as a reference and to whom when. You gotta establish like a certain timeline and start figuring out, when these things happen, when certain claims are made, and and so on and so forth. That's really good to do. So, it's crazy. You can get these books on geography. They'll give you the list of these places. They'll tell you where they're supposed to be. They'll give you quotes from the Bible. And you see, that'll draw people's attention away. They'll give you all this information from the Bible, but then they'll kind of just stamp Palestine on it. Nadia Abu al-Hajj was right on the money when she said that these places, they've got such few actual sites where they claim, there's sites all over the place. But you start looking at some of these sites, like for instance, there's a site that's northwest of what they call Jerusalem. And they say that that's the biblical Gibeon. Well, first off, it's not even remotely close to where the right place Gibeon should be. But secondly, it's freaking tiny. It's just a tiny little thing. It's nothing. What it is it's a place showing you that this is about the size of what the inhabitants of this place would probably be living at, because that land can't sustain the kinds of big, huge populations that the actual land of Canaan in the Bible describes. And they don't have tons of sites. And they have to confuse you. They have to use sleight of hand. I was watching a video by this guy who he specializes in doing these Palestinian tours, basically bilking unsuspecting, ignorant, professed Christians out of their money. They're standing in this site that's like, 20 miles north of where the purported Jericho is. You see, they've been claiming that place is Jericho for a long time, because they do have a few certain places. You remember in that introduction I just read, the guy says, besides for Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Jaffa, which is supposed to be Joppa, and Akko, which is supposed to be the Aku, well, we don't really know of anything. We don't have much information on anything else. Yeah, no kidding. It's been like that since Josephus. If he names a place to you, he will not be specific enough for you to get a good idea of where that place was. I kid you not. In the writings of Josephus, the same sleight of hand BS. Like he describes, he doesn't describe, he does the same thing the Talmud does. They just take passages of the Bible. They don't give you anything, further. They just distort. They distort. They take passages of the Bible and distort, and then use something like that to try to convince you that they're the actual Israelites of the Bible, when nothing could be further from the truth. They do the same thing with Palestine. Josephus did the same damn thing with Palestine. He'll give you a passage of the Bible, so Genesis 14, where Lot was carried off by those 4 kings. And you got to wonder, what the hell were those 4 kings doing? One of them was the king of Shinar. You know where Shinar is supposed to be, right? Shinar is supposed to be the plain where Babel was built. And they're extorting the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim. What the hell were they doing all the way? They were coming all the way there. You have to completely go around the desert and all that, right? And they were approaching from the north. They weren't approaching from the south, like as if they had a navy and they sailed from the Persian Gulf up the Gulf of Aqaba. To what? They were extorting them. How rich were they? In what? Bitumen? In asphalt? Give me a break. So I'm watching this guy, man. And he's convincing these people that there were 2 Gilgals. And you see, the reason is this is why. Because sometimes they can't just name a place, give its basic coordinates from the Bible, and then just tell you, we think it's kind of over here, and we're not sure, can't dig anything up, but sometimes they can't do that. Sometimes they get stuck. And so what's typically the solution when they get stuck is the 2-place solution. And that might actually be a chapter. That's the multiple place solution when they get stuck. So in the Bible says that this place, Gilgal, was east of Jericho. And the problem is over in Palestine, there's nothing east of Jericho. There's nothing they could dig up. There's nothing. And they don't mention to you that the waters of Jericho, they aren't there. But anyways, there's nothing there. The walls of Jericho, these massive, huge walls that Yahweh brought down, there's no remnant of them left. Oh, were they carried off by somebody else? Were they? Oh, well, where? There's nothing there. There's just a place. There's a settlement where people have been probably, you know what probably actually built that settlement? What probably built that settlement up? What probably built up Al-Quds, which they call Jerusalem? What probably built up what they call Bethlehem? Tourism. So, from the earliest times. Yeah, from the earliest times. Like from the times of this character called Constantine, that early tourism. People being convinced that they needed to go on a pilgrimage. And listen, if that was kind of the thing, like, oh, well, you've been a naughty boy, and what your penance needs to be is to go to Jerusalem and visit the Church of the Holy Moly, and, bathe your knees in the fountain of the blessed whatever. But they literally they published this, that was like a punishment. I'm not kidding. But so not only a punishment for people with the money to readily do something like that, I suppose, but it was encouraged for everybody. You should go to the Holy Land. And so if you were going to go there, you would typically have to travel over land or by sea. And so there were a lot of inns by land and a road by land and maps by land to get there. Well, that's really funny, because if they had all the inns and they had all the maps and they had all of this to get there in the 4th century AD, what happened to all the maps of all the places? Where did all the places go? I mean, by Constantine days, well, wouldn't there still be a lot of those places? Where'd they go? Oh, well, you gotta understand that the Romans just had to destroy this and that, and they had to destroy this place and that place and the other place. Why? They had to besiege and destroy all of what? The hundreds at least of places listed in just the book of Joshua as existing in just Joshua's time? That was 1,500 years before. And it not only existed in a pretty steady state, even with other empires coming in and taking over certain parts of it, it grew and expanded. What are you talking about? Did the Romans make all of those places cease to exist? Did they have directed energy weapons? I shouldn't even put that in these freaking people's heads. That's what they'll start coming up with. They'll start coming up with these channels, these shill channels out there. Will start coming up with, well, I don't know. It seems like there's, seems to be like sufficient evidence that perhaps what happened was that the Romans had directed energy weapons that they were using on a lot of these places because the Romans were just psychotic. And, some Jews would get out of line. And, look, it happened because the Romans were horrible. What did the Romans do for the Jews? Just bring them law and order? Screw them. A few Jews would just get out of line and just refuse to, stop touching children. I don't know. And so the Romans would come in and they would use their directed energy weapons, and they would incinerate the whole place, and that's why we can't find all these places. Damned Romans and their directed energy weapons. And I guess apparently they also had a massive shrinking machine that they put on a satellite and pointed at the Holy Land and turned it into Palestine. I'm not kidding. In the early 1800s, they're seriously saying that out of all the places on the globe, it's so amazing, so bizarre that we should know so little about the land of the Bible. How amazingly bizarre. You know what? You're right. It is. That is amazingly bizarre. That's amazingly bizarre. And you can't come up with a good damned reason why that is. Because you should have had a hell of a lot in England in the early 1800s, boy. Yeah, buddy. You should have had a hell of a lot back in the 1611s when you were making that King Jimmy translation of the Bible. You should have been rocking the maps in the back of that. Just like in the one that my little Pentecostal church gave to me. You should have had all them maps in the back there. How can this possibly be? How can that possibly be? We were supposed to be over there for such an extended period of time. And I'll tell you something, man. If anybody was over there around this point in time, they call the Crusades, if this Saladin ever existed, the salad spoon guy who took over supposedly all of these lands over there, he was a Mohammedan. If he ever existed, and Richard went over there and won all these, and then the Knights Templars and all that stuff. Look, did you know that the Knights Templars actually still existed in the 1800s and they were doing tours to Palestine? Do you realize how lucrative something like that is? And here's what happens. So if you can provide safe passage and you can convince everybody that that's the Holy Land and they want to go over there, and then you can take them to the place called Jerusalem, you can take them to the place called Bethlehem, you can take them to Jaffa, Akko, maybe a couple other spots. You can take them up to that little swamp called Miram, and you can take them to the brackish waters of Tiberias. Probably not down the Jordan, because it's first off, you don't want people to know how absolutely oppressive and hot and horrid the whole Jordan Valley is, that they call the Gore. Sucks. Freaking sucks. There's not settlements along there. Nobody wants to live there. It sucks. It's hot. It's nasty. But these people that are paid to go and explore it, they write these flowery things about, oh, it's so nice, all of the colorful, thick verdure along the Jordan. It's just so breathtaking. It's breathtaking because it's just so miserable. You can't breathe. That's what you really mean. So they wouldn't take them along the Gore. Or they wouldn't tell them about the Gore, or where the Gore name came from, or why it doesn't have anything to do with the Bible, or the fact that nobody over there called it the Jordan. Yeah, but they might take you to the Dead Sea. And you're probably not going to see anything at the Dead Sea like all of these writers claimed about it. It's just ridiculous things, man. And, you talk about people that are totally, like, wildly different accounts, these people. Whoa. Josephus says, it's called the Dead Sea because not only can nothing live in it, and that's pretty universal, he says birds fall out of the sky that fly over it. I hadn't heard that one before. And he says that it stinks. He says it freaking stinks. Now, he calls it asphaltitis. And so, all right. This guy, Lynch, who was sent over there, U.S. Army expedition. And I haven't read much of Lynch, so I can't tell you a lot. Okay, but I can tell you that while he was staying by it, because he supposedly sailed on it, and this other guy, Molyneux, not a name I trust. This Molyneux supposedly sailed on it as well. Both Lynch and Molyneux, they both claimed that there were severe storms on the Dead Sea. One of them that said that, like, overturned their boats, and it was just this horrible thing. But Josephus said that not even a wind blows there. He said, literally, it's called the Dead Sea because nothing will live there and not even a wind blows there. It's so oppressive. But Lynch and Molyneux are saying that they got caught in these tumultuous storms on it. So the only evidence of asphalt, bitumen, is that there are clumps of it that people will see if they go to tour the place. There will be these clumps, and what they say is that from time to time the Dead Sea just coughs up clumps of asphalt. And Arabs, which I'm sure have been benefiting off of tourism for a very long time, have told stories like, oh yes, it was big storm and earthquake, and it belched up a hunk of asphalt the size of an island. I kid you not. And then they'll claim that they went out there and hacked it all up and sold it. Yeah. Sure, that's what happened. So there are these hunks of what look to be bitumen or asphalt in a couple of places, not everywhere. I haven't seen them everywhere. I've seen some people that have sent back on tourist sites, tourist roads and tracks and destinations, hunks of asphalt. And I mean, of course, everybody knows that the Jews who make a lot of money over in Palestine from tourism, that there's no way that they would take these hunks of asphalt that look about the size that you could just put in a truck or something and take there and dump, throw some rocks on them, and say, oh yeah, check it out, Lake Asphaltitis, belches up asphalt. You can't see it. Nobody's witnessed it. In the modern day of cameras and video recorders and stuff, nobody's shown me this big old hunk of asphalt just come up out of the Dead Sea and get belched up on the shore. There are people that would claim that, yeah, it did stink around there of sulfur, but then others that would say, yeah, there was no smell. There was no smell. There would be writers who claim that the Dead Sea changed colors 3 times a day. Okay? And these other guys are like, I didn't see it changing any colors. But they would usually justify the ancient authors, especially if it was Josephus. They would work very hard to justify why he said the stupid things he would say. And they're probably not stupid. They were just completely ignorant, and they were expected to be read by people who could never verify those stupid claims. Some of these people, they literally said that the surface of the water would seem fluorescent at times at night, and there would be some kind of phenomenon where it would get fluorescent and then it would go black at certain places, and they would think that there was an island in it. That's not everybody. That's some people. Okay? Other people will tell you something very similar. Oh, yes, it was perfectly calm. Yes, there is no wind. Yes, this, yes, that. Everybody's got a different story, and some of them vary so wildly that it's stupid. It's totally stupid. But yeah, I mean, maybe the Templars would have taken you there. Maybe the Hospitallers had all kinds of hostels and inns and various places where you could eat and you could stay and you could do this and you could do that. And you could buy a nice t-shirt that says that you were there. Maybe a lot of these places, just peoples and organizations, made their money off of the tourism that's been going on for it seems like a hell of a long time. A hell of a long time. It is admitted that Constantine's mother came up with the names of most of these places. They'll try to say, well, she didn't have anything to do with like naming Jerusalem or Bethlehem or any of the other places that we know for sure were Bible places. Oh, but she just made up a lot of other stuff. Yeah, well, I'm going to believe you too. That's totally believable. Sure, you either lied or got caught in completely erroneous activities, before this. But yeah, I mean, that part of it, that sounds totally believable. No problem, man. Yeah. And here's the thing. I haven't even scratched the surface. I haven't scratched the surface of the disparities between the Bible and the Middle East, specifically Palestine. You'll find them, though. If you start tracking these sources and you start reading what they've wrote and you start paying attention to what the Bible has to say about geography, you'll see them. Not just geography, various things about geography. The Bible says that the Yarden swells early in the springtime and that it swells at harvest. So what do they tell you about the Jordan and Palestine? Oh, it swells. Oh, it floods. Yeah. Even though there were cameras, there were working cameras back when these guys were exploring this place before the Jews got in there in the 40s and needed all of those water systems to pump them water so they could actually live there, because this place was not meant to sustain large populations. Let me tell you, not even close. They'll tell you, yeah, it swelled. Of course, just like the Bible says. The problem is that the Jordan and Palestine only swells or outputs a lot more water in the winter. In the winter. Okay? Not when the Bible says, which would have been around March, April, and then it would have swollen again in the harvest season, September, October. The exact opposite times as when that Jordan will actually swell. And the only time we have a picture of like a flood, like a big flood. There's like one picture from like 1938. And I'm sorry, it didn't look that bad to me. I've seen real rivers that have flooded. Yeah, that's a sight, man. That's real. It's funny because what you find these little nuggets. There was one or two writers that just admitted, like just straight out admitted, they said, and some of them were actually reverends, and they were just, they're probably just completely believed that everything was on the up and up, you know? And they were just being honest about what information they had gathered. Here's what we've gathered. Here's what we know. Here's what we've seen. Here's what we don't know. There were guys that that fully admitted back in the 1800s that, yeah, I mean, although the Jordan was known in the Bible to flood over its banks and to swell every spring and harvest every year throughout Bible times. Nobody's seen it do that. That's weird. There's a huge difference between the rainy season over in this place, and this place is absolutely like subtropical. It's not like our environment. Okay, there's some areas in the very north that are more like what, say, we in North America or Europe would be used to as far as the climate and the scenery and so forth. But most of the country is quite dry, quite hot, gravelly, ugly. And they do their best, like every time one of these propagandists sees like 3 acres of a cornfield, I mean, they go on about it forever like it is the Garden of Eden itself. And I suppose in contrast over there, it would seem like it. But, you know, the devil's in the details. So there's that. There's the problem with when it swells, even if there are times when it's gone over its banks, and I'm talking about the Palestinian Jordan, not the actual biblical Canaan Yarden, and it doing that at the wrong time of the year. Then there's the problem of the fact that the Jordan in Palestine is known, it has unequal banks, most of it. Most of the course of it, the banks are unequal. And they're unequal in the sense that they're typically lower on the west side, the Palestinian side, and higher on the east side. Now that's a problem, and I'm going to tell you why. So hey, it's the next day. I had to stop suddenly on that recording. So I'm gonna try to stay though with just what I was saying. The banks, they're uneven. The banks of the Jordan are uneven. If you open up, let's say you open up Google Earth, okay, and you zoom in over the Dead Sea facing northward and approach little by little and keep yourself, I guess, close enough to the ground to where you can make out the topography pretty well. Zoom in. You don't have to try to get water level. Just so that you can kind of see the Lake Tiberias, or what they call the Sea of Galilee, up towards the top. You know, get about that angle. So you'll notice, for one thing, that, all right, so a lot of the explorers in the 19th century described the Jordan itself, the Palestine Jordan, as being in like a couple successive valleys. I guess that's sort of appropriate. The Jordan itself, the Palestine Jordan, and in my own writings, I've actually taken to tagging it as just Pal Jordan, as opposed to Yarden from the Bible. That was in Canaan. They describe it as being in like basically 2 successive valleys. One of them, the greatest width of that valley, is probably about 13 miles. And that is south of Jericho. You see, once you get to Palestine, Jericho, you're very close to the Dead Sea. And that's where that valley sort of, it's at its broadest. Because it's kind of matching the broadness of the Dead Sea. And I guess that actually brings up all kinds of weird questions about their theories about Sodom and Gomorrah. I won't go too far into that. So on the right-hand side, if you're looking northward, what you'll notice is that most of the immediate east bank, or facing north to the right, of the Palestine Jordan is the land immediately rises. In fact, there is rock outcroppings. I don't know if the explorers described that as the basalt. That's the area of basalt. So in fact, what would happen is if you checked out the area, so you'll see Jericho to the left, because there's not many areas that people even settle in what they call the Gore. Ghor is what it's been known as, at least back the 1800s forward. And that describes that whole broad valley area, the Gore. And as I mentioned earlier, the Gore is, for one thing, it's oppressively hot. So you're not going to find a lot of villages. In fact, right near the Palestine Jordan itself, it's ridiculously hot. And so you're not really going to find much for towns or settlements along it, like right on it, which of course is adverse to Bible descriptions, because the Bible has a number of places directly on it, for one thing. In fact, the Bible has at least a few places that are listed as cities of not only a tribe that might be on the west side, but the east side as well. So you know that this is literally right on the Bible's Yarden. So you'll see Jericho, you'll see the Palestine Jericho, the spot they claim to be Jericho. You go directly due east of it, and you'll see that portion of the Palestine Jordan. If you zoomed in quite a bit on one of those meanders, you'll see that there's a road that leads there. Okay, that's a real popular tourist site, because this is the site where you'll see a really old, like, Byzantine church on the east side. And there's a good reason that there would be a Byzantine church on the east side, because, there's tons of passages in the New Testament that says that John the Baptist and then Yeshua, Jesus, was baptizing in the territories of Judah on the east side of Jordan. And that's not just a New Testament thing. We see territories of Judah on the east side of Jordan in the Old Testament too. You have to try to explain that based on what they say was where. And none of it works. But what you want to pay attention to is the topography. So you have all of those essentially like gray rock outcroppings, you'll notice. And many of them just extend right to pretty much like the brink of the Palestine Jordan. So you can't have a floodplain there. Okay? At best, the best thing you could hope for is maybe a floodplain on the west side. If you go up a bit and you go directly due east of where they say Jericho was, where that tourist spot is, and where that old Byzantine structure is, I don't know that it was always a church, okay? It's an old structure that looks Byzantine. There's an area It's kind of, it's not big. I wouldn't call it big. I don't even know if it's a mile long, like north to south. That there's some it's relatively level land, and it doesn't that rock outcropping isn't encroaching upon the banks of the Palestine Jordan at that point. So they might want to say that this, of course, would be the area where they crossed. There's a lot of reasons why they would have to speculate that. One reason is that those rock outcroppings are not easy to travel. You can't really just cross them. And you had a lot of people. This was not simply a military endeavor, okay? At least the 9 tribes that were going to be staying to the west of Yarden, they had their wives and children with them, and then you had the armies of Reuben, Gad, and at least a portion of Manasseh. They were coming across with them because they gave their word that they would cross Yarden with the rest of Israel and go clean out Canaan with them so that they could have the land that they liked. On the east side of Yarden, which they said when they looked at it, they said this is a land exceedingly good for cattle, basically for grazing and ranching, and that's not what anybody would think looking at, especially the patch of land where they were said to be staying. And certainly not enough, not even close to enough. The only really decent land you'll see is going to be on the east side of the Palestine Jordan, still in the Gore. And then you have these mountains. On the other side of the mountains, you have the Jordanian city of Ammon, which that city actually gets tons and tons of water actually piped there from the damming of various wadis. And that's the way that city has managed to grow and be as big as it is. Nothing over there at the time that these guys were exploring in the 1800s could even hope to come close to those kind of sizes. It's just all... Yeah, I want to be careful with the word unnatural. It is inorganic. I mean, there is nothing feeding that area, really, that would allow it to grow to that size. It's absolutely not. And that's supposed to be. They want to claim that that's actually the site of the... I guess they would claim that would be the site of the old... capital city of Amun, which was actually called Rabbah. And now it's really funny, too, because of how Rabbah is described at one point by David's captain Joab as the city of waters. It just cracks me up, man. Oh, boy. Anyways, so the land, even that patch, which is by that tourist attraction and the Byzantine chapel, there's a bit of land that's not those rock outcroppings that you really can't travel over. Now, there is some more a couple miles to the north that some people could say, well, maybe that's because it would be a better spot. Because the area that you have at that tourist attraction between the banks of the Jordan, which they say was once bigger, so that's encroaching even more on the land, okay, that they would have between these rock outcroppings and the Palestine Jordan. That one there, where the tourist site is, if you gave everyone in the nation of Israel, and we're just talking people, and we're not talking about their possessions, which they brought with them to cross over. They didn't make multiple trips, okay? They went over one time with all of their possessions. So all these men with all of their women, with all of their elderly, with all of their children, all of their babies, all of their cattle, all of their, if they had at this time servants, they were enslaved to the Mitzri, but that doesn't mean that they didn't have servants as well. So if they did all of them, I'm pretty sure they shook off most of the mixed multitude, the Orabim and whatnot, out in the wilderness. They saw the anger of Yahweh once or twice and probably figured, yeah, we're out of here. We're not going to do this. So it just Israel. And that even if they had anyone who wasn't direct servants of theirs that was still with them by the time they got there, they shouldn't have been crossing with them. But still, look, you give everyone an average of 2 square feet for their bodies. Again, we're not counting all their possessions, their wagons, their whatever they were carrying with them too, and their livestock. They took it all with them. We're just counting bodies, okay? And we're going to go really low. We're going to say like just 2 million. All things told, just 2 million. 2 million people that can stand on their own 2 feet. We'll give them 2 square feet, and that is packing them in, man. They can't fit. They could not fit in that area where that tourist attraction is with that Byzantine structure and everything. Between the banks of the Palestine Jordan and these rock outcroppings, they'd never be able to fit there. And they have to put them there because that's one of the only spots where there's actually a path from the level land beyond those rock outcroppings to the banks of the Palestine Jordan. So the crazy thing is, if that weren't bad enough, all of that land on the east side of the Palestine Jordan in that spot, and even in that spot, if you go north of that and you find it, that next area that's pretty much clear, that doesn't have the same paths to it, that land on the east side of the Palestine Jordan, it's all higher than the land on the west side of the Palestine Jordan. You're going to be able to find very, very few spots where the land might be a bit lower. I mean, seriously. Just in general, all the land to the east of the Palestine Jordan is higher than to the west. Right, I mean, right from the banks out. So that's a serious problem, because they say that the Bible says that the Yarden was flooded, and did every year that time of year, and that the Kanim, or the priests, went first and stood in the flooded areas of it. You can't have that on the east side. So just the topography doesn't exist to have that on the east side. Even if you brought the levels of the water up a lot, you wouldn't have that. And you can't bring it up enough to where you could say maybe they approached it from the rocky areas, those raised rocky areas. Because if you're going to flood all the way up to there on the east side, you'd have to flood in the west side first. It's all lower. So, pretty much without exception, their approach, they're not going to be seeing flooding on that side. And that's just besides the fact that you may see a lot of claims in those books by various explorers, and then by the time 100 years about after Seetzen, it's just so hard to believe what a big deal they made about Seetzen's travels and explorations, and how little they admitted knowing about the place. it just should boggle the mind. So about 100 years after that, then you had like the real official books. There were 3 of them written. And in fact, Nadia Abu-al-Hajj, in her book Facts on the Ground, she mostly refers to these books. They were books written by 2 guys. One name is decidedly Jewish sounding. It's Kitchener. And the other one, Konder. And I don't know exactly what kind of name that is, whether it's Jewish or not. Those are supposed to be basically like the official survey and topography. They in those books they pin down a lot of places which she uses that a lot actually as, criticism that these places could not be, of course, were they named, but they did. They really had to create some kind of an official model, essentially, and they didn't have an official model on the ground. So they basically had to contrive this official model on paper because it doesn't exist on the ground. This is exactly why she wrote her book and entitled it Facts on the Ground. And if more people would have the decency, if more Europeans, Northern Western Europeans, Israelites, would have just the decency and the intellect and the desire to do what this woman did, Nadia Abu-al-Hajj, who is half Arab and half European Israelite, then we would be a whole lot further along. But most of my people, they're slouts. They love their comfortable lives. They love their creature comforts, their pleasures. And a lot of them know, because of who runs our universities now, that they can't rock the boat. I haven't seen, honestly, I haven't seen much dissension even specifically, I guess, in American schools and universities from Western Europeans in centuries. Not really much I can find. I'm kind of sorry. I'm a little dumbfounded and tripping over my own words here because I'm trying to recall, and we've kind of been in that condition for a long time. Probably a lot of them, for the same reason that a lot of people wrote books on the geography and topography of Palestine, supposing it to be the Holy Land, and didn't think twice about the fact that there's more problems with making Palestine the Holy Land than if you just wanted to prove that it wasn't. Like a lot of other deceptions, it's all the greatest amount of evidence that they have is not physical evidence. The greatest amount of evidence they have is essentially intellectual, if you want to call it evidence. People writing things and making claims that I haven't seen the proof of. As I said, I've looked really extensively for the actual evidence that can be pretty well corroborated of, the swelling, even the winter swelling. Now, I've come across, for instance, videos of people who have, they've recorded the Palestinian Jordan more in the upper Gore, so not far south of Lake Tiberias, when it's in the winter and the waters are rushing down harder. Again, though, a lot of those areas that they record this happening at are places with pretty steep banks. And I guess it would be really hard to tell if you would have much flooding like you would typically in a river floodplain. That doesn't really necessarily tend to happen with rivers that are descending that fast. You see, the Jordan descends pretty fast over the area of ground that it covers from Tiberias to the Dead Sea. In fact, from where its sources are, it's basically finally been agreed that it's like 3 sources, north of Tiberias. North of, they have so many names for it. They say it's the biblical Merom. It's this, it's a real swampy, marshy lake, that nobody wants to live near. By the way, nobody lives very close to it. And the reason is because it's, for one thing, it's full of a lot of disease-carrying insects. So you might be able to see, they've got, like travel videos and promotional materials where people are like bird watching, because they boast of all of these various species of birds that come there at certain times a year. But it's not a nice place to be or to live. And in fact, villages are quite far away. The closer you examine any of these areas in Palestine, just the more unlikely it seems that we'd want them. As I became more and more familiar with Palestine, not just like southern Palestine, I think a pretty good amount of people got an idea about southern Palestine. Southern Palestine is a freaking rocky desert. It's a rocky desert, and it's got very few areas where people can farm and make things grow. If it's, if you're looking at a small village of people, there are areas where you can have farmland grow certain crops. You can't grow anything and everything, but you can grow certain crops. You can have areas where you could have limited amount of animals graze. But that land is extraordinarily limited, and it limits its population a lot. And, man, you'll see some real deceptive propaganda out there. Like, people will claim things like that Israel, as they call it over there, is a big supplier of dairy. What they don't tell you is that a huge amount of the feed for what livestock industries there are there they're importing. They can't grow it all there. Not even feed for these animals with the industries that they have there. The land can't sustain this. It was never meant to sustain large populations. Okay, that's why anybody who just is honest realizes when Israel came out of Mitzrayim, they had 2 to 3 million people. Yahweh tells them in the wilderness that I'm bringing you into a land and against 7 nations, greater, larger, you see, and stronger than you. So you have to cope with just out of the gate 20 plus millions of people in Canaan. He wasn't talking about the areas east of Yarden. You can't cope with that. You cannot cope with that. These people, if you had 20 millions living there, I don't even know what sorts of technologies they would have to be employing to try to get their fresh water. I don't know what all shipping they would have to be. They would have to be getting all kinds of feed and food for them imported. The land would not sustain that population. And remember something. He only told them that there was these 7 Canaanite nations greater in size and stronger than them. He didn't name all of the various nations that lived there, folks, because there was a number of other nations of people that lived there. It was just those 7 Canaanite nations he named that were greater and mightier than them. And he didn't even include in that list, by the way, the Palshatim, Philistines. And I really hate even just the transliteration Philistines. It could be Palashtim or it could be Palshatim. Not Philistines, though. And I'm not even entirely positive that the land of Palestine got its name from the Philistines. Strange kind of thing there. Not from the actual people. The Palashtim or the Palshatim, I don't think that it came from that. I think that the name Philistine was used in English transliterations to get it somewhere between those Palashtim and the actual name Palestine. And I'll tell you, might as well tell you why. Just keeping in mind, this was a nation that was so large and so strong that they caused nothing but problems for Israel as a nation, which was just growing and getting stronger and stronger for hundreds of years, for centuries. Remember something, by the time the book of Judges was done, and then we have all that space in front of it, 1st, 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings before the captivity in Babel, we're covering so many long centuries just then. By the time the end of the book of Judges came, they had been in the land of Canaan for about as long as we've been in the land of America. That's a long time, right? That's a long time for populations to grow. And the Philistines are causing them problems from a relatively early time. So they were, and they had lived there as a culture and an empire from the time of Abraham and probably before. So they weren't even counted in all of that, right? Now, what I wonder is just about the name. Because I just want to kind of figure out where it came from. And here's why. Because for one thing, there's this whole idea that this guy Herodotus traveled that area and he labeled the inhabitants as Syrian, it was, what did he call them? Syrian Palestinians or something? There was no talk of Hebrews, no talk of Judahites, no talk of Israelites, no talk of all of those various tribes that were supposed to have lived, if this is the land where the Bible took place in. So you still had that name being used back at that time. So it's kind of interesting when you look at the fact that so there was this area called for a long time in Europe called the Pale of Settlement, and you look a little bit at possible roots and etymologies of Greek and Latin words. And like one thing that's kind of bizarre is G3822 in Greek is paleo, or sometimes it's paleo. And G4566, Satan. If you put those two together, you have paleo Satan. It's not that far phonetically from Palestine. Paleo meaning old or ancient, and Satan, of course, meaning adversary. But that's not it. There's actually other. There's also stenos, G4728, which actually means a straight or to be narrow. Paleo stenos. You know, and besides this, if you looked up Pale of Settlement, and they would tell you that it comes from a Latin term, and they would say that the Latin term means a stake. You know, like a stake in the ground, because the whole point of the Pale of Settlement is that's where the Jews were allowed to live, but they couldn't come any further into the east. Okay, that was sort of a confinement. But it doesn't actually mean clay. It doesn't actually mean stake. When you look it up, it means more like clay, like clay ground. And if for instance, you want to look up like Greek and Latin suffixes, the ine is usually used as like an adjective relating to. Palestine could come from a lot of sources that don't have to do with the so-called Philistines, which any English translator who was transliterating names would know for a fact that Philistine is a crap transliteration of the Palashtim or Palashti, or I guess it could be Palshatim or Palshati or Pelshit is sometimes just the land of Pelshit. I'm not trying to say shit, but it's just really P-L sh, the letter sh, and T. I don't like saying Pelshit, so I usually say Pelishit. Either which way, it's a really bad transliteration. So we honestly don't really know where the name of that place came from. And it existed, at least if this figure, Herodotus, which I have to tell you, what you won't hear about, he is pretty well criticized, as in passing off some really crummy information. Okay? Like as in whoever wrote a lot of the stuff that goes by the name Herodotus, was pretty weird. Mostly in the fact of what things that he might claim geographically about where things are. That's what he seems to have a big problem with. But if he used the term Palestine at that point in time, and he's using Syria at that point in time too, first off, that would have had to have been the area of Aram that they translate Aram into Syria all the time, which is not very fair because you don't get a good understanding of what and who Aram was. Secondly, based on a lot of biblical geography, there was actually another nation which should have been in an area where they say Syria now is. So they've got serious problems with the whole idea of just putting in Syria for Aram. And then today you can look on a map and you can see where Syria is, because they're going to have to put nations on top of one another. But the other thing that is kind of interesting is that by the time, let's just say these events happened in Palestine, and let's just say Herodotus was a real person, and that he traveled the areas of Egypt and the Levant. So the thing is about the Philistines, they weren't even a major influence in and around Canaan land, even by the time that the Judahites were carried away to Babel. Their power and their influence and their kingdom had been so greatly reduced and diminished that they would not particularly be the people that this area would have been named after. I'm not talking about Palestinians who, again, if these events happened over there, the Palestinians that currently exist or existed 100, 200 years ago in that land, or go back even further, would have like no relationship to the Palestine. So if that land was named after any particular people, that wouldn't have been it. So that's kind of weird too. And the fact is, if they did still have any kind of a decent influence and empire, and this did happen in Palestine, it would have been extremely limited. And then there were a lot of other people that lived in what came to be transliterated as Samaria, so the northern kingdoms. I just have to say there would have been such a narrow chance of anyone figuring that land for being named after, of all people, the Pelishit. I can't help it. Unfortunately, there's a number of names in the Bible that have shit as a root. I guess we're going to have to get over it. I'm going to have to. But, you know, I am kind of childish sometimes. So I'll do my best. But really, there's just there's no reason to think that whole region would first off be named after that one people out of many. who by that time were pretty waning in their influence. There's also no reason to think that Syria would have become as common in his day either. None of the so-called facts seem to add up very well, really. So, with that, I'm at like 240 in this recording. And unless I want to start cracking open some of these books and really getting into quotes and counter quotes, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to save that because is there plenty between these historians / geographers, and most, if they were one, they were often the other. If they were geographer, they were to some extent a historian, or if they were an historian, they were to some extent a geographer, because that's the funny thing about history. If you have an occurrence, you have to have a place. If you have places, you typically have occurrences that are, synonymous with the places. They kind of go hand in hand. There's just no shortage whatsoever of the discrepancies between the ancients. And boy, oh boy, there is certainly no shortage of the discrepancies between the land, the landscape, the topography, and the let's just even say the history of Palestine over what we're told has been 2,000 years. Man, is it a mess. There's no shortage of material for anybody out there who's interested, that wants to get more into this field of geography and real, actual biblical geography. So, anyways, I'll see you on the next episode.